Okay, so we're going to talk about carbon, and I'm going to strip it down to the basics and try to keep this short and sweet so it's as interesting as possible. So what's the deal with carbon? So most people don't know that the soil is actually one of the largest by nature storage facilities for carbon. And when pasture rotation and animal grazing is done responsibly and appropriately, you can actually not only equal and cancel out, you can actually net negative because it can absorb so much if done properly. So let's just get down to the nitty-gritty. Real quick, here's what happens with carbon. You have a piece of grass, a blade, it's got its blade hanging in the wind, shining in the sun, and it goes through photosynthesis in the blade and it travels down the blade of grass into the root system. And once it's in the root system, those nutrients, that carbon, goes into the soil and the soil holds it. All well and good. But now let's say that a farmer comes through with a tilling machine and turns that soil and digs it up. What ends up happening is that carbon comes out and it surfaces and meets oxygen. It oxidizes and creates a gas that releases into the atmosphere. So one way to not have any carbon released from your soil is just not to till, but that's easier said than done. Tilling has been around for ages, for centuries, and most people don't know how to farm any different. So there's a couple other things that you can do. The first thing is, instead of doing monocrops, just growing corn every year, letting it go, clearing it away when it's done, planting corn the next year, actually let the corn die and compost in place. That debris from the plants breaks down and returns nutrients to the soil. Even better, don't plant corn every year. Plant something else. Different plants take and give different nutrients and properties to the soil. So if you're not just planting the same thing year after year, different nutrients, especially if they're rotting in place, are giving back to the soil. Even better than that, a perennial has a deeper root system. A perennial has more biomass, more biological infrastructure in the soil that leaches nutrients into the soil deeper. It gets carbon down lower. When we have different plants, especially perennials, annuals, they all grow at different rates. They all have a different length of root system. Carbon is being absorbed through photosynthesis, going down into the roots, into the soil, feeding it and locking it in place. If we can let those plants rot in place, perennials, annuals, all that, we're going to be putting in more carbon. Okay, so that's crops, but what about animals? Let me show you. So this is one of our pasture spaces, and now that we're starting to hit that sweet spot in spring when things grow like a mile a minute, we're going to divide this up even more. And pasture rotation, rotational grazing is essential for locking more carbon into the soil. Here's why. So first, the sheep come through because they take off the very tippy top of the grass blade. So they just get the tip, and as they go and as they're grazing, they're leaving their droppings, which is returning nutrients to the earth. Then what ends up happening is the horses come through. They leave their manure. The horse's stomach digests parasites that affect the sheep, and the sheep's stomach digests parasites that affect the horses. Now, not only do we have a parasite reduction, but we've actually managed to fertilize with two different types of animals. And I also let the ducks in here. They get their own shot at rotational grazing. They leave different nutrients from all of the different things they eat and the way their body breaks it down. I only let animals rotate for about a week before they move out. Now, essentially, these lawnmowers have cut the grass for me, and it charges it to grow. And when it grows at a more rapid rate, photosynthesis happens and brings that carbon back into the soil. The catch is you have to make sure that the land is resting and growing grass and in recovery longer than it's feeding your animals. Okay, so we've talked about crops. We've talked about pasture rotation. Let's go talk about bare soil. With high traffic areas, like where my horses go in and out of their pasture spaces, the grass dies, plant life can't grow, and we end up exposing our soil. Anytime soil is exposed, you're opening up your soil and it's releasing carbon back in the atmosphere. So, hey babies, These guys are standing on wood chips, and it's healthier for their hooves, it's healthier for their pasterns and their fetlocks, sure, but the main reason that we have them on wood chips in their run is because it's covering the soil, and it keeps the nutrients, keeps the carbon in the ground. If it were exposed, not only is it unhealthier for them, but it actually releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Even better, wood chips break down. They compost in place, and that nutrients from the wood chips, the pine that is actually from our very own trees that we cut down, goes back into the soil. Now, I know there's negative Nellies out there who are gonna tell me, well, yeah, but compost releases CO2 into the atmosphere, but guess what? It's biogenic carbon dioxide. It's not human, anthropogenic, human-made carbon dioxide. Biogenic carbon dioxide is not accounted for when it comes to talking about all of the negative greenhouse gases and emissions that are in the atmosphere. What I'm gonna do is, because I know there are going to be people that want to learn more, I found some articles that I think are a good summary of what we talked about today. Go ahead and find those links in my stories, and I'll save all of these links into one massive sort of Earth Month highlight. But please don't let me be your only source of education on this. Please do your research, because it all starts with education that we can then take and put into action. Okay, that's my tip for the day. Stay tuned for tomorrow.